Please be seated. So if you have ever had that uncomfortable experience of encountering someone that you had not seen in a while and you didn't recognize them, well, now you've got good company. Imagine not recognizing the guy who you'd spent 3 years with, and it's only a couple days later and he comes and you're with him in a public place and you didn't recognize him. About a month ago, I was in our cathedral of St. John the Divine down in Manhattan for a service, and a guy walked in right in front of me and he turned around and he said, "Garrett Mettler?" This was a guy I was in graduate school with, and I was really, really glad that he recognized me because I could have looked him straight in the face and not had a clue who he was. So that experience most of us have had of being in the presence of someone and maybe not quite, maybe something, you look familiar, do we know each other? And this is what happened on the road. And ordinarily on Sunday mornings I try to kind of take a singular thread and just trace it all the way through, something thematic. There's so many things going on in the scriptures every single Sunday, but this morning, if you'll allow me the liberty, I'm going to do more of a gospel potpourri, a little bit of a smorgasbord of things that are happening in this passage because they build on each other and they are so kind of illuminating as to how they are taking place, these gradual stages of these disciples' recognition of Jesus and his interaction with them. And so one of the things that stands out in the language of the gospel and the narration of how they came to be walking beside each other, we hear the narrator say that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. That's an interesting way of saying it. Not they didn't recognize him, but there seems to be an implication that there's some kind of purpose behind their initial lack of awareness of who they were with. It made me think about the value of what happened next. They respond to him with what I like to call the "what planet did you grow up on" tone of voice. You know this, you've been a part of conversations where somebody is referencing something that they assume is a part of everybody's awareness, and then you say, "Well, what's that?" And then they look at you like, "What planet did you grow up on?" And then they, say, I can't believe that you've never heard of that. I can't believe that you've never seen Casablanca. I can't believe that whatever, right? So they respond to him after he asks them what they're talking about. "Are you the only person who does not know what has taken place?" And then they start telling the story. Now, if they had recognized him in the beginning, of course, none of that would have happened. They wouldn't have narrated the events that took place. They wouldn't have identified him as a prophet. Because you don't need to tell somebody about themselves when you understand who they are. But they didn't, and so he got to hear them talking about what they had internalized. And it reminds me of that reality of what we absorb depending on how it happens in our experience. And Don, you know this as a classroom teacher, that when people just passively receive something in a lecture format, they absorb maybe around 25-30% of it. If they participate in it in some kind of an interactive way, maybe there's a back and forth, the number goes up to around 40-50% retention. If they have to teach it themselves, then that number goes up to around 75%. So what that means is a half an hour after this service is over, you will have forgotten most of what this sermon was about. But if you had been charged with the responsibility of preaching this sermon, you would have dug really deeply into what this passage was about. You would have engaged with the content of it and the strands of the narrative, and you would have internalized a lot of it in such a way that you had to transmit it to other people. And it works that way no matter what the content is. So when the disciples are telling Jesus about himself, as opposed to if they had recognized him and he was carrying all of the weight of the conversation, they are revealing from within what they have understood about his identity, and they're trying to grapple with what the events of his death and now maybe resurrection, they're not really quite sure. There's been a report that his body was gone, but this is not at all clear what has happened. So they're working it out. It's an active process. It's an engaged process. And so they get done with the narrative, and they say, and then Jesus has this rather harsh response. He says, you fools, how foolish you are, slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And you would think at that moment, that's when the revelation would have taken place. As we read it now, it's kind of like, oh yeah, this guy. But they still don't quite realize who it is. And so that's where a really important move takes place. He is prompting them. You have identified this guy Jesus as a prophet. Do you still not understand all the things that the prophets have declared? And then it says that he starts revealing, illuminating the scriptures to them. And in retrospect, they look back on it and they go, wow, yeah, something was going on there. We couldn't quite figure it out, but were not our hearts burning when he was revealing the scriptures to us? That's what they say after the fact. But they're still not entirely sure. So here's the momentous move. Here's the important move. The difference between them being passive and them being active in the process of their encounter with him. They get to, the crossroads, and they're going to stop because that's where their destination is, and he was going to go on. And their active participation in this event is, stay with us. How many interactions do we have on a regular basis where, when it's convenient for us to overlap, as long as we have a reason to be in that same place with that person, as short as passing outside of an elevator, maybe seeing one another in a grocery store, some other kind of quick passing by, will engage with each other. But as soon as our paths depart, that's it, it's over. It's defined by where we were going. And they say, no. Don't keep going. We want more time with you. So he stays. And that's when the seed, the opportunity for their understanding of who this is with them was planted. If he'd have kept going, and they did kind of the social nicety thing that we usually do. Well, it was nice talking to you. I hope you have a good rest of your trip. Yeah, see you later. You guys too. We don't get the rest of the story. And they invite him to stay with them. And then he does what we're going to do in this service. He celebrates what we have come to call Eucharist. He breaks bread with them, that sacrament that was instituted on Maundy Thursday that we commemorated during this most recent Holy Week. And it says, in that moment, his identity was revealed. And how that happens for us sometimes. You see something, you hear something, it's kind of in your peripheral awareness, but then there's some seminal event and it clicks. And you go, aha, eureka, epiphany. Now I get it. And it doesn't happen in the beginning usually. It doesn't happen oftentimes in quick chance encounters. But it happens when we go deeper. It happens when we put ourselves in the place where it can happen by inviting that space to expand. And then, apparently, that's the whole purpose of the encounter, because strangely, mysteriously, miraculously, it says, when they recognized him, he vanished. Their eyes were opened and he vanished from their sight. And the idea is not, okay, Jesus is he's back, and that whole crucifixion thing, that was just a bad trick. And now you guys get to spend weeks and months and years with him, and it's going to be like it was before. It's never going to be like it was before, because the resurrection has still happened. But there was that gift of a glimpse of an encounter, because they were willing to engage, and they were willing to invite him to stay, and they were willing to go deeper with him. So the story really is one of an example of initiative. We have all kinds of opportunities in our lives to pass very briefly and quickly in interactions with people and information and all kinds of potential opportunities. But many of them are just that, fleeting, and they don't leave much of an impression, and in most instances we're passive, and if somebody asked us about it a week later, it would be hard to remember. But in the life of faith, we have these invites, these openings, these little cracks that are given to us, and then the question becomes, you want to spend any more time on that? You want to go any deeper with that? Do you want to explore the presence of the Spirit that is giving you just a little bit of a glimpse of what can be? And when we imitate these disciples and say, yeah, I want to explore that further. Yeah, stay with me. Let's go deeper with this. Then we get these opportunities of revelation. Is it a magic formula? Is there 45 minutes a day in the Bible, and then you will become, brilliant with scriptural and spiritual insight? It's not like that. It's relational. But it requires what we see that they did in this passage. It requires us to say, yeah, let's go further with this. So the invitation of this passage is, when do we recognize the presence of God in our lives? When do we not recognize the presence of God in our lives, but we have an opportunity to share what we maybe glimpse in part, and let God then respond to us and say, let me take you further. And it's in those moments in which the epiphany moments are possible. The epiphany experiences, the encounters with the presence of God that give us that fire, that excitement, that enthusiasm for knowing that God really is with us. And the end of the story is oftentimes what the end of the story is with anybody who gets really passionate about something. You want to tell other people what happened to you. You'll never believe it. About a month ago, I was at the cathedral, and this guy that I went to seminary with, he recognized me. And then just last weekend, I went on a hike up Bear Mountain with he and his wife, and it was really a delight. And we never would have done that if he hadn't have recognized me. And I'm so glad that we reconnected, and it was great. Those kind of things can happen with us in our relationship with God as well. You'll never believe it. I was going about my day, and it was totally ordinary, and things were just so-so. And then there was this kind of breakthrough moment, this epiphany moment, and it really changed me in that moment, and it was a gift. May that be your experience. May, when the Holy Spirit comes alongside of you, may you want to linger with the presence of that Spirit for a little longer than it might be convenient with the rest of the things that are on your schedule for that day. And may you be rewarded for taking that initiative by experiencing the revelation and the enlightenment that God offers to us on a regular basis. Amen.